Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered at the Water Cooler. My name is Melissa Evers, and I am the head of ecosystem at Kreneon. We have been enjoying a series that has been interviewing our co-founders. And in that context, I am joined by one of our co-founders, Stan Hanks, to interview me because I am also one of the co-founders of Kreneon. And so our purpose here is for you to get to know both our company and each of us a little bit better. And so with that, I will turn it over to Stan.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. It's always a pleasure. Let's start off a little bit with where are you from and how did you wind up in Oregon?
I am from Texas, just similar as yourself. Grew up outside of Houston, went to UT Austin for both my engineering degree and my undergrad. I worked for ExxonMobil in environmental engineering, doing wastewater remediation. And then I worked for Dell, and I worked in corporate strategy and finance for them. And what brought me to Oregon was working for Intel. I started with Intel in corporate finance and worked there for a number of years, and then moved into software engineering and managed up the ranks to managing fairly large teams that were delivering a variety of different software development efforts on behalf of the company. And then moved into some of our corporate transformation ecosystem initiatives on behalf of our office of the CTO. And that's where I spent the last several years before joining Kreneon.
That's awesome. And if you could let everybody know just what exactly persuaded you to join this band of crazies, because it's a big jump from Intel to a frontier edge startup like this.
Yeah, well, there's two parts to that story. One is my background. And as you heard me say, I was doing environmental engineering, finance, strategy, software, and ecosystem building globally, right? If you look at what Kreneon needs, that's pretty much the stack. But what drew me to Kreneon was the just realization of the water crisis and its magnitude. I've always been someone who's been climate minded and both and have a strong sense of mission and purpose for doing good in the world. But just the gravity of the challenges that are facing both humanity, but also the economic consequences of that really grabbed my attention. And as I understood more deeply the dynamics of the water industry and that capital just is not going into infrastructure. You look at, $320 billion spent globally on water infrastructure last year, 450 billion spent on bottled water. So we can transport water, we can move it. We just don't know how to invest in it to actually provide the necessary infrastructure and capabilities for humanity on this planet. That is what we're about. That's what we're going to solve. And for me, I wanted to be part of that change.
Sounds like you've got a lot of passion about doing about solving big problems that have an impact.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I sure do.
Right. So, Mike talked about the sort of the broader vision, and I've talked some about the technology pieces, but talk to me about the stuff that you're tracking. What are you seeing as the touch points that are important that we're missing?
Well, I think one of the things that is really changing is both the regulatory landscape and the political landscape with regard to environmental investments. As we've seen things shift across the globe, we've seen a lot of countries and a lot of industries lean much more heavily into science-based targets. And if you look at the V2 initiatives that are tied to the European CSRD, you're really looking at a really quite different set of expectations, both with regard to replenishment, but also with regard to geography. And so, when I think about what Kreneon provides with regard to capital inflow into new technologies to replenish water or create water credits in the basins in which they're needed, our asset creation with regard to the metadata that we're collecting in terms of geography and quality and MRV reporting if necessary, et cetera, really does enable both businesses and municipalities and sovereign nations to engage meaningfully in driving credible change, a tested change that can be verified. And for me, I feel like we're at the right place at the right time, not just from a regulatory environment perspective, but also from a critical need, whether it be a supply chain need or whether it be a humanitarian need.
So let's contextualize some of what you're talking about. The EU corporate net zero V2 rules. Uh, Tell us a little bit more about the framework in which that hangs. We're not in the US, water is seen mainly as a local problem, and you mainly worry about can you afford to water your grass as opposed to, and whether or not the data centers are going to steal all of it, but they've got a different viewpoint on that. So let's talk about that some.
Yeah, so, and I will fully disclose that I am not a regulatory aficionado. I am just interpreting the CSRD, I believe, stands for, uh, actually, I shouldn't even guess. It's Corporate Sustainability Resource Development. I don't know, but the general purpose of CSRD is to provide next step of regulation for EU countries, and the UK is largely following the CSRD mandates for companies that operate in the EU, but also for companies that want to sell in the EU. And so there's a set of rolling standards and obligations that aren't just around carbon and carbon reporting, energy across your supply chain, et cetera. There's also water and a number of other types of sensitivities with regard to the CSRD reporting mandates, both for companies that exist and build in Europe, but also those who import their products into Europe. And so depending upon where you fall, there are different standards, and the STBI V2 standard is one of the ones that is around water replenishment, particularly in the basin in which you remove the water from. And these are all frameworks, and there's a lot of contextual nuance to how they are applied and where they're applied and what's applied to who and all of that other kind of stuff. And I am by far not an expert in these areas. But I do look at these kind of tectonic plates of movement with regard to expectations being placed on companies to be good stewards of the resources that they consume, and to be able to demonstrate that they are a good steward and do so in a way with full accounting and transparency. This is not, kind of a spreadsheet estimation anymore. This is expected to be measured and a tested, validated impact. And so I think all of those factors end up playing towards, at least on the benefit of water and perhaps carbon to some extent as well, at the point of creation, can really add differentiating value for both municipalities, but also for those enterprise customers who are wanting to be able to demonstrate the value that they are creating.
So the science-based physical measurement piece, that's in response to a lack of trust, right?
That is, yes, that is based on a lack of trust and a lack of, I think, a lack of trust because there's been greenwashing and people have claimed things, and it has not exactly been always verifiable. And I hesitate to say true, because I think there's always elements of truth in a lot of the things that people claim. But it is also true that there's a perception of greenwashing and a perception that it has not all been true. And so, whether the perception is true or whether the reality is true, it is actually meaningless. What is expected, though, is to be able to demonstrate it with verified, attested certainty that what you've said you've done, you have done.
Right. So one of the things that you've done a lot of over your career is building consensus in groups that are not necessarily consensus aligned to begin with. And uh, the, let's talk about social license to operate and how that plays out, because there's been a huge pushback. I mean, we touch water, and water is like a very fundamental essence of life, right? And as people have fear around water sufficiency, and in some places we've really hit, water zero. Um, there's more of that. So can what are your thoughts on that?
So I think so. I come at this from both sides of the equation, right? I used to work at Intel. We supply chips. People build data centers. We drive the future of technology. We're all dependent upon the future of technology. And then, from the perspective of being very conscious of the challenges associated with water impact. And honestly, many of the people that I engage with in the tech industry feel similarly. Like they acknowledge the challenge, but they also acknowledge the need for us to continue to drive our innovation and technological advancements forward. So it is in that context, within that tension, that we find ourselves right now. And I think, when you talk about social license to operate, we hear this a lot from some of our partners in industry, concern around losing a social license to operate. And there's been recent surveys where, over 50% of the US population doesn't want a data center in their backyard and all that kind of stuff. And I think we're experiencing a number of different factors. One is this perception of lack of transparency with regard to what are you actually consuming and what is the actual impact in my community. Um, Also, a lack of knowledge with regard to, and okay, and what else are you doing with regard to aquifer replenishment or circularity or cleaning up PFAS or whatever. So I think there's a lack of understanding of the realities on the ground in the specific communities. I think there's also a general tectonic fear that is emerging in the US population around the role of AI and the impacts that that is going to have on AI in the workforce. And so I feel like some of the challenges that our partners are experiencing with regard to data center deployments is it is partially about the data center. It is also partially about communities' very real concern that they are somehow contributing to, workforce displacement, and my
Right.
son's not going to be able to get a job and things like that. And all of these fears and uncertainties are coming together in terms of this resistance, which I think is really quite tragic, because while there is real issues with regard to water consumption and energy consumption, the hyperscalers are highly attuned to those challenges and working very, very hard to lower energy consumption. The industry is working on tailored ASICs that are going to consume a lot less energy to compute AI. Like, it's an industry-wide force trying to fix some of these challenges, whether it be water consumption and circularity and reuse. And I mean, like, there's just so much that's being put on trying to solve the real technical challenges. I think being able to be very transparent with our communities on the truths and the realities of what is happening, what is being consumed, what is being replenished, is our best path forward. And I think that's where Kreneon can really help some of our industry players, with that level of truth and transparency. We could create dashboards where communities could see exactly what's happening, right? So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and innovation, on top of the existing huge pressure that the industry is applying to itself to be able to continue the innovation curve while also consuming a lot less energy and water.
Well, yeah, and it sounds like that everyone has a vested interest in getting a solution to this, both from an actual operational footprint and then the social pressures as well.
Yeah.
And we can fix most of these problems if we spend enough money on it, but there, as you pointed out, that we're not spending any money on water, at least not to the extent that seems to be indicated. So putting your financial hat back on, which is what I love that you've got that because you had a whole different dimension to most of the discussions that we have. Um, Talk to me about how the standard virtual water purchase agreement structure and forward markets are going to have an impact on both the behavior of the buyers and the financial infrastructure around this asset creation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll get a little finance geeky here for a minute. So
Please
stop me if I
go
use
for
any
it.
acronyms that are not helpful.
To
But
all of our viewers out there, please feel free to hit pause and go look stuff up. This is important.
when we create Kreneon, we shift the economics of a water infrastructure project. Specifically, we move it from being, hey, I'm going to go install this capital, and then I've got water that's coming out of the ground that I don't know the price for, and some of it I'm letting leak, some of it is being purchased by people, some of it, it's a very standard model. I've got an asset, I'm going to write it down, it's done. And that's part of the reason why project financing and banks don't want to get engaged, because they're like, I don't know what your ROI is. Sorry, return on investment. I don't know what your future cash flows are associated with this thing. Why would I give you this money if I don't know I'm going to get my loan back? If I don't know if I'm going to get a return on my investment? And so what we do with regard to shifting the economic model with Kreneon is that we enable water purchase agreements to be established. And water purchase agreements essentially are a fixed revenue stream that goes off into the future, 10 years, et cetera, into the future, that says, I am going to purchase this volume at this price for this length of time. And what that enables for the banks or project financing institutions is certainty with regard to their future return. They have very low risk on the future economics of this project because there are committed water purchase agreements in place. So when you go and you ask for a loan, they're like, heck yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And what that also does, not only unlocking that project financing, but it also lowers the weighted average cost of capital for that project. So the weighted average cost of capital is essentially the rate by which those future cash flows are discounted into today's terms to be able to create the net present value of that project. And when you have certainty with regard to portions of the future cash flows, that weighted average cost of capital generally falls 2 to 3%, which in the realm of
That's a
weighted
lot.
average cost of capital is huge. Like
That's
weighted
a
average
lot.
cost of capitals are like 8 to 11% generally. And for infrastructure, they tend to be lower. But when you have the certainty associated with those future revenue streams and the future margin that's going to be accreted on this asset, you're like, I don't have risk. I have certainty. So the weighted average cost of capital goes down, which in turn then creates an expansive impact on that net present value to the tune of like 20 to 30%, because these assets have really long lives. And so the ways in which the financials shift, both with regard to the future revenue streams, the future margin structure, being able to sell volatility, speculators, derivatives, credit markets, et cetera. All of these things unlock very differentiating value for the owner of that asset and for the people that stand behind the financing of that asset. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about is looking at a real global problem and enabling the capital markets and the diligence of the capital markets to help solve and unlock the solutions that will end up saving a good chunk of humanity if we're successful.
So it sounds like this will make it possible to finance projects that we currently can't finance because they'd either cost the cost of capital is too much or the banks just won't touch it because they see a different risk profile.
That's correct. That's correct. And there are plenty of projects where that you've got need, you've got folks that are willing to do the install, and we just haven't been able to make those economics work. And by changing some of the certainty associated in the risk profile, we are hopeful that a lot of the projects begin to pencil out, and we can really start solving problems.
But I didn't hear anything in there that this adds a layer of cost and complexity that would make the water more expensive to the consumer.
That is certainly not the intention. I've had conversations with some of my friends and families, and they're like, "Doesn't commodity, don't commodity markets make things more expensive?" And there is evidence of that in some markets. So I'm not going to belie that. Certainly in the energy market, there was speculation and there was profiteering, and sometimes energy got more expensive. So that is a reality. We believe that through both the transparency of our market and the players that would be buying and selling these assets, that we are not going to experience something that is going to inflate prices. The reality is, in every other commodity market that we've evaluated, prices have actually lowered and lowered significantly. Whether you look at food, whether you look at whether wheat, meats, all of these things that are human needs, the establishment of a commodity with transparent pricing and standard units um, drove prices down, and in some cases significantly. Like wheat went down 90% because they didn't have seasonality, they didn't have a speculation, they didn't have supply demand issues. It really radically transformed the market, and that is what we are hoping will happen with water as well.
Okay. And a reminder to our viewers, this is talking on an inflation adjusted basis. Its prices are high right now. You're not imagining that Melissa's not telling you something that's incorrect. It's over a longer period of time.
Absolutely.
So what's the biggest thing right now standing between what you're talking about, what you're envisioning here at Kreneon and success? What are the barriers to getting this underway?
So our biggest barriers are a couple things. One is we need to get Kreneon on a sure financial footing with regard to our investors and investment in the project. The second is aligning those buyers and suppliers. So we're working currently on implementing several proof of concepts with many of our partners to demonstrate the technology and prove that it all works. So as soon as we're done with that, we will begin to scale and begin to work on implementations with project financiers, with real in the world infrastructure that needs to be built. And so really lining up those partners with regard to the collaboration, lining up the folks in the industry who are interested in participating with us, either from an investment perspective or from a buy side, I want water. Being able to put all of these players to the table in ways that create value for everyone from a win-win perspective. That will be kind of the next piece of work. And because it's such a global problem, literally, we're likely going to be focused on specific regions of the world. So Desert Southwest, EU, UK, MENA, etc. But we do want to go fast. Water scarcity is a critical challenge for the entire world. And so really trying to figure out where are those places globally where all of those players are aligned. And by applying Kreneon in our model, we enable the unlock that is critical for scaling water in that particular region. So if you are interested in engaging in that conversation, please reach out to me. And we will pull you into, if conversations are already underway in your particular region, we'll pull you into those conversations. And if they're not, we'll figure out how we get going.
Awesome. So basically the next steps are a proof of concept demonstration and then live field deployments so that we've got data coming in from the field and the participants in those areas can see the impact that then
Yeah,
translates to hopefully everybody else.
absolutely.
Right. That's so. What are you most excited about looking out over the next year as we're looking at this? What are you most excited about?
I am really excited about driving industry level collaboration with all these players. As I've entered the water market and spoke to so many people, the most folks' hearts are absolutely anchored in earnest purpose of solving water challenges, whether it be reclamation and remediation, or whether it be new water technologies and sourcing. There are so many people that are laser focused on this global humanitarian crisis of a 40% gap that they're just right for catalyzing um, a movement through a horizontal play. And I think Kreneon provides that platform for that horizontal play to unify the work that's happening and accelerate it. But I'm also really excited to bring all these players to the table. To the time, the question you asked earlier about building standards and bringing consortia together. The reality is that despite the fact that folks might be competitors, if we can unify on various elements of standardization, everyone goes faster. All boats are lifted. And so rather than competing in these highly verticalized proprietary implementations that it's my way or the highway, if we can get to a place where we can drive standardization and cooperation, then I think all of us will go faster, all markets will expand, and we will more adequately address the crisis that we're facing.
That is awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. So we're getting close to time. Let's wrap this up with everybody's favorite question. Tell me something about yourself that would surprise me.
Besides my 4 chickens, which doesn't surprise me. I know you know that, which I just love. They're the best, my little ladies. Let's see, something that surprised you. My first job was as a water aerobics instructor. I bet you didn't know that.
I,
So and I actually loved that. I really, really loved. It was a way to stay fit and a way to help people who are, really trying to stay active. And so it was super fun. It was super, super fun. Love that job.
so you have very deep ties to water.
This is true. I had never made that connection. There you go. There you go. Yeah, I was a
Well,
swimmer all through middle school, high school, and then started teaching water aerobics. Yeah.
water aerobics.
Yep.
Fascinating. All right. You're right. I had no idea that was not on my bingo card.
There you go.
All right.
All right. Well, Stan, thanks so much for the interview. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for our Unfiltered at the Water Cooler podcast. And we wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.